Millions of workers get a pay rise from today as the government's increases to the national living wage come into force.
But it'll also mean big businesses have an extra cost on their hands the day before Donald Trump's tariffs are due to hit British industry. Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Jonathan Reynolds, joins us now. So, good morning, Secretary of State. I presume you're on here to talk about the increase in the national minimum wage. I won't call it the living wage. You call it the living wage, by the way, which was something...
No, I call it the national minimum wage, but we had exactly that conversation before we came on today.
Yeah, it's interesting, because George Osborne stole that off the Living Wage Foundation, which sets a much higher living wage than the one that your government has set. Do you think it's time to get rid of the phrase living wage and turn it back to just being a minimum wage, which is what it really is?
Well, it's a little bit confusing, you're right, because the living wage, I understand, is technically the main rate and the rest of the rates are still the minimum wage. But look, that confusion, I think, isn't helpful. What is helpful is the uprating that you quite rightly highlight today. So 3 million workers having a pay rise, the main rate going up to £12.21 an hour. That's worth about £1,400 a year on average. And look, we know things are still tough for people. I'm not in any way not aware of those pressures. But this is the kind of change that starts to make a difference, that starts to make sure wages are rising faster than inflation, that gives people the chance to have some of the spending power necessary to combat some of that. And, of course, for the 18 to 20-year-old rate, one of the biggest increases ever, starting to equalise that. So I want everyone to have a living wage. We can't get there overnight. We've got to work with business and other partners around doing that. But that cost of living being featured in the calculation is an important way to make sure people can start to meet some of the pressures they're under.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you change it back to the minimum wage name, if you agree that there's a complexity and confusion with it. Just a note, something else that's going to be happening at the end of the week is you're increasing national insurance costs for employers. I just want to read something the Office for Budget Responsibility, the official body on this, said about it. In the 2025-26 tax year, firms will pass on 60% of the higher costs to workers and consumers via lower real wages and higher prices, and absorb 40% themselves in lower profits. That's its forecast. So you want wages to go up, but one of the first main actions we had in the budget last year is something that is bringing wages down.
Yes, and we have always been clear that there was an ask of business in the budget. I totally recognise that. We tried to mitigate that through the changes to what is called employment allowance, which is the allowance businesses have before they pay any national insurance contributions. We've also got a range of measures, whether that's the long-term reform of business rates, the changes to planning, to regulation, to try and mitigate some of those pressures. But all businesses themselves know that the starting point for any kind of prosperity has got to be stability. I've heard, to be frank, no alternative to the policies pursued by the Chancellor to fill the black hole that we inherited. I wish, as any new government would wish, you don't have to start with difficult decisions. But those pressures were there. I wouldn't be able to come on here and talk about a whole range of things that are important to me that my department pay for, from post office compensation to money for the steel industry, unless the Chancellor had repaired the national finances and put them on a sound footing. I know there's an ask there. We tried to recognise and mitigate that, but ultimately we all need the kind of economic stability that's got to be in place before you talk about people being better off.
Well, let's talk about economic stability. It's Bill's day today, B-Day if you like, because people are having their backsides rinsed by what's going on with bill after bill rising. First of all, water, regulated prices, privatised firms, no competition, up 26% on average. Some people seeing bill rises of over 50%. Billions of pounds paid in dividends to shareholders while companies rank up debts. What are you going to do about it? Is it about time to take it back into public ownership?
Well, look, with the water industry, I recognise the level of failure that has existed and how angry people are around this. The regulation that's in place now prevents the kind of things that we saw under those years of Conservative government. I understand people seeing dividends taken out of a business and reinvestment not going in is not acceptable to them. It's a much tighter regime now, and where those bills rise, it's to pay for the kind of investment, particularly to make sure we're separating out the sewage side of the water treatment from your water that you get, to prevent the kind of pollution of waterways, which quite rightly, again, the public feel very strongly about.
It's going up 26%. You're in government. This isn't the former government. You're in government. That money hasn't gone back. People are seeing their bills rise. 26% is a regulated price rise. It's going to continue to go up substantially above inflation for at least the next 4 years. That's your responsibility. What are you going to do about it?
The distinction I'm making is this is money to invest in the system rather than going out by way of dividends without that investment taking place.
But the money's already been wasted. Why aren't we recouping that from the water companies who pay billions out in dividends?
That is all part of the new regulatory arrangements that are in place and the wider review of that sector. I'm not in any way defending what has gone on in the past. I know how strongly people feel about it, but they do want to see the investment that will take sewage out of public waterways. They feel very, very strongly about that, and that is in the main where that money is directed to and going. I don't think everything can be in public ownership. There's limited public money, particularly for that investment. You've got to work with the private sector around that, and where you do that properly with the right regulation, that's what delivers for the public.
Energy bills, the energy price cap that dictates the price two-thirds of homes are on in the UK, in England, Scotland and Wales. It's another regulated bill, up 6.4% today. But more interestingly, it is up 18% since the Labour government came into power. Why? You promised to bring bills down. They've gone up 18%.
That promise to bring bills down is government policy. That's what we want to do by the end of this Parliament. And the fundamental way to do that is to remove the relationship between the price of gas, between the volatile nature of fossil fuels, and in the main, the electricity price. Until we see that kind of big structural change, which is why we're so committed, to clean energy, we will not relieve the pressure that we need to relieve on people's bills. So again, I understand the pressure. It requires that long-term investment to do that. But we've got to break that relationship, because that's why we were so exposed as a country, even though every country had some level of exposure, to what we saw after the invasion of Ukraine. That relationship to gas and fossil fuels has been the source of the pressure on energy bills in the main.
I'll ask a longer question while you have a glass of water. I've got the same sore throat. So look, you talk about that with energy, but when you weren't in government, and I used to meet with countless Labour MPs and shadow cabinet members, we would talk about a social tariff to bring bills down for the most vulnerable. We'd talk about getting rid of standing charges. Nothing. Tumbleweed in terms of action for consumers on energy since you came in. So yes, you can talk about the long-term infrastructure in your plans. Why aren't you doing something more immediate with an 18% rise on energy since you came into power for two-thirds of homes in England, Scotland and Wales?
Look, I can assure you that there has been no tumbleweed in the Department for Energy since the election. The ambition, the determination that they've got to get this country onto a future of secure, clean energy supplies is absolutely central to delivering upon that. You're right to say we've got to look at some of those short-term pressures, and there's some work underway around that to make sure you get that right.
But you've got to do it properly. You haven't done any of them.
Well, look, the spending review is not far away, where we've got the chance to do some of those things that will make a difference in the biggest way. I can't announce those today. You know you've got to wait till the big announcements on that as they go forward. But we're absolutely aware of the pressures that were in place. But we need that long-term plan, that long-term investment, as well as for relief for people in the short term. Until we have the kind of ambition on clean energy and breaking that dependence on a very, very volatile gas price, we'll never give people the energy security and the comfort on bills that they need.
Forgive me, I think the government seems to have a wait problem, because every time I ask it something, it tells me to wait. I wrote to the Secretary of State for Energy about smart meters. We have a perverse targeting that means companies are fined if they don't install smart meters. Even if they don't work, they have to install them, and yet they don't repair smart meters because the targeting is to install them as opposed to repair broken ones. I've written to the Secretary of State asking him to change this. I've had nods and smiles. Nothing's happened. Do you have a wait problem?
Well, look, I will make sure that you get a response to that. Again, that's a programme that has got a lot of difficult things going on with it. There's a lot to fix, but we've already started.
I'll do another one, broadband and mobile, OK? So broadband and mobile phones, for years we've had above-inflation mid-contract price hikes. The regulator has finally changed that, so new customers can get told before they get a bill exactly how much it will go up. That is an improvement. But those rises are actually bigger than the inflation rate price hikes we had before. And instead of doing what I wrote in the submission, that you should ban above-inflation price hikes, you're allowing over-inflation price hikes, which is inflationary and will continue in a vicious cycle. Isn't this something that you should be getting hold of? Isn't it time to get hold of the nation's bills? This is surely why people get a government like yours in power, to crack down on the cost of living. But you've got a wait problem.
Absolutely. Well, look, I disagree with that. Those issues you raise, fair enough. But look, this pay rise today is exactly the kind of thing the government controls, the national minimum wage, the ability to set that in a way which takes into account the cost of living. It's also why we're committed to the triple lock for pensioners to protect them as best we can, why we've had that freeze on field duty which benefits everyone. It's why breakfast clubs are being rolled out very soon. That's worth about £450 a year to the people who are affected. It's also, by the way, why we've run the economy in a way which has let the Bank of England make those 3 cuts to interest rates in a way that benefits everyone across the whole country. So look, I know there's a lot to do, Martin, but we've got to work straight away. Of course, we're not going to turn around 15 years of stagnating living standards and low wages overnight. But we've started to see the impact of the changes that we have made, particularly with wages for the first time in a long time, really rising faster than inflation. That's the way you ultimately make people better off. And yes, these costs that they face, we've got to tackle these. There is work underway on all of these things. And I'm as impatient as you to see the difference that can be made. But on your central question, which is this government about a change? Is the plan for change about changing what we've inherited? Is this why the government was elected? Absolutely agree with all of that. And that's the difference we're seeking to make.
Well, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for engaging in a robust conversation.
Thank you,
and I hope we manage to fix the weight problem.
Thank you.